hij staat aanbellen.
Ja, nee, maar je ziet mij niet.
Dat laat ik
Over nadenken, denk ik ook.
Ja, we hebben het allemaal. Like, what are they gonna do? Nee, maar dat is... Ja, nee. Ik moet alleen hem even helpen als lens moet verwisselen. Maar voor de rest, is echt... Zou iedereen dat ik graag mee wilde vanavond? Dus, ik ben wel even benieuwd wat hij te zeggen heeft. Maar dat... mijn hemels, hè? Ja, maar kijk hoe judging mensen zijn. Mensen zijn zo judging. Als ik in de bal naar de
Ik ben er volgende knijp. NSA, ik ben het vrijdag weer.
En ineens een heel groot stem van de Piratenpartij.
Wat kan je niet? Nee, de rest kan je opzoeken op internet. Maar ze weten er niet bij. Ja.
Insta?
Snapchat. En speel.
paar keer die geen goed contact meer. Dat is in één keer zo een hele rare piep.
Luister jij weer mee?
Ja.
Ja.
All right, everybody, we're gonna get back into the interview. The live feed is up. Please grab your drinks and find a seat. The closer the better. You don't want to miss this. And we'll get back to the interview. We've got a hell of a lot of questions. I'm really happy that a lot of people have a lot of expertise they want from you, because that's what we're here for. We couldn't, can you hear me all right? Because sorry, my earphone is active. We couldn't, we can't ask you all of the questions that have been entered today, but we will be answering a couple of them later on the Facebooks and on the interwebs, basically. You did have a couple of things that you wanted to say about how the mass surveillance programs, the link between that and the improvised explosive devices, the IEDs. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, and you brought a couple of slides.
Yes, I did.
Excellent.
Actually, we were working for Customs and Border Protection. They handle imports, exports, and immigration and all in the United States. And under one of the contracts, we were looking at all of the data about people wanting to buy things from the U.S. and sell things in the U.S. And they had a small set of data, about 500 million records. Keep in mind that one record could be like 1,000 automobiles coming in. So it's like they've got 500 million records over a 10-year period. So now they're over 1 billion, I think, electronically on file. So, and they looked at it as a real mess of data, because what it was thousands of people around the world whose first language is not English are filling out the forms, and putting down different, spelling things incorrectly and abbreviating things and using different abbreviations. And so they get all these variations of things, and they look at it, and their computer people told me, well, the data is the data, it's a real mess. This is a messy thing. And I looked at it, and I said, this is a gold mine. Because one of the principles I used for mass data, because I was doing mass data analysis in the digital, in the analog world with the Russians and the Soviet Union, whatever, I handled programs and things that would handle any possibility that they could ever do. And so this was such a finite problem, it's a very small problem. So I looked at it and I said, this is a gold mine. The more data, the merrier. This n squared thing kind of is really not true, because the more data, the better. And it doesn't, because the answers are all in the data if you know how to get it out. And that requires you have to start out with the understanding that you have to correct the data from the beginning, from the very beginning, and you have to use the data against itself to correct it. And if you do that, then you end up with a gold mine. And let me show you what some of that is.
So what is this picture we're seeing right here?
This is a picture of IEDs. So what they did was they took artillery shells that were left by the U.S. military as they zoomed right by the storage areas, and left all this stuff there. So they went in and got all these things, and all these shells can be used as basically bombs along the road. And so then they had to buy equipment to set up and remotely can try and detonate the bombs and things like that. So that was what these are called, improvised explosive devices. And these are the things that they have alongside the road where you're driving by, and they detonate it to kill people. So
this data is a matter of life and death.
yes. Yeah.
What are we seeing here?
This then was this is the first thing that came out of the Bureau of Industrial Security, right here. That's in the Department of Commerce, and what happened was the U.S. military overran an IED factory in Iraq. And when they did that, they found all of the parts that were there, and all the companies they ordered it from, and things like that. And then they went back into the trade data, the import-export data, and they found these were the companies that were involved in buying that equipment. So these were the companies that were helping them excuse me, let me go back here. They're helping them buy the necessary equipment to construct the IEDs and detonate them in Afghanistan and Iraq. These were all Iranian-run companies out of Dubai, which is the Arab Emirates. It's not in Iran, so they didn't have the import-export controls because they weren't ordering from Iran. They're doing it from Dubai. And so these companies, what happens is the U.S. government, as well as all the other governments in the world, do stupid stuff like they only look at by company name, what they're, I'm hitting both buttons at once. But at any rate, let me go back here. Just a second here, one more. There we go. So they'll look at this one company here, they'll look at that name and say, what is this company importing and exporting? And then they look at the next company, separate from that one, and so on, so that, you know, going down, they're looking at individual companies here, where the collective group is what's ordering all the parts. So all the parts, if you look at what the collective is doing, you can see the IED, but if you look at them individually, you only see one part of it. So you never, so they skipped over this. They never knew that these guys were involved in putting together IEDs until they overran this factory. But then when you retroactively look at it, you can see, well, this one's ordering part 1, this is part 2, part 3, part 4, and so on. And if you put them all together, you have an IED. So how can you collectively pull together what they're doing? There's my big thumb again. But anyway, so if you do that, you can look at the postal box numbers, the same postal box number. They also have the same address. Well, that means that all these things are going to some common place, and that the activity is happening in that common place. So that meant these we call attributes or signatures, and the names simply are aliases then that map to that signature. You call this a polymorphic mapping of many to one. So the idea then is, here's the real rule. Let's all sort everything that collapses to the same attributes, and then these are the companies that are involved in something, fishy that they need to be looked at. They're not necessarily guilty, but it shows you which ones you need to look at to see if they're smuggling something or trying to do something criminal. And part of it was to show, is that the back? What's it?
That was back, I think.
Maybe you should use your pinky.
Next one.
I should do something separate. Let me do this here. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so these were the locations, you see, and they give you the shop numbers and everything. So you can map it back to that. So we took this data and then went on the web with Google. I said, okay, let's get the rest of the data.
It's as simple as that. You just
Yes.
go to Google and you
Yeah,
just
we
look
did
stuff
it.
up.
We did this at home. Kirk Weedy and I did this. So then we got all these phone numbers and everything, and mapped all that data to it. In the meantime, we provided all this data to, of course, Customs and Border Protection, and also to Colonel Woody's office in the Pentagon. We knew these people. They're working on IEDs and tracking the IEDs. So we gave them all that data too. And knowing our U.S. government and how incompetent they were, we knew that they wouldn't necessarily tip off everybody else that's getting killed by IEDs. So we knew friends in Canada, in the intelligence area, so we sent all this data up to them too. Just on the offbeat chance that our government wouldn't do the right thing, which they didn't, okay? But at any rate, down here at the bottom, you see this one company came in, we picked it up, and it had the partial number up here that's blocked up there in the old addresses. But you see some new phone numbers here, 1400, 1500. What happened was the Iranians saw this Business Bureau of Industrial Security alert, and they said, they're looking for us. So we'll change all our names. So they changed all their names and put them out on different websites with new attributes too. And they took the old ones off. So when we had sent the data to the Bureau, eventually went to the Bureau of Industrial Security, they got all the new data, and they said, okay, let's publish the new data too. So in the meantime, the Iranians changed all the names and dropped the old ones off the web, but they put the old data and updated data on the old names back out as an alert from BIS. Then the Iranians saw that. This was the sequence we were following. We thought this was funny. Then the Iranians saw that, and they said, they're looking for the old names. Let's put them back out there. So they did. So they put it back out there, but not in the same places. Okay, so the same webs didn't have. So we knew where they used to be, and they weren't quite there again. I put them in the wrong place, but we knew the Iranians were doing it. So we tipped off, of course, the Bureau of Industrial Security as well as the Colonel Woody's office and everybody. We would tell them, this is what you guys missed, okay? It's all on Google if you wanted to find it, it's all there. So that gave us all the names of, and all the new data. So I don't have the new data here because I don't have it in a warrant. So I didn't put any of the old, any of the company names up here, you know, for legal reasons. Until they put it in a warrant, I wouldn't show it internationally. So, but this is all in a warrant. But you see, and this was more data we collected, more names and addresses. And this was the kind of form that we passed down to the people with all the names and associated addresses, postal box numbers, phone numbers. And so this showed how you could follow imports, exports, port security around the world for every country in the world and every importer or exporter. Because this then would group people who are doing smuggling dope, weapons, whatever. They're trying to do it and hide it. They're doing it with different names, aliases, and so on. But if you go through common attribute, collapsing data by common attribute, and showing all those as aliases mapping to it, like, you know, polymorphic mappings, many to one, one to many, many to many kinds of relationships. You can show all this in the world, and it gives you port security. You can tell all of your customs inspectors around the world at all the ports of entry what things to examine and what not. And we propose to do this for all of the data at Customs and Border Protection. He said, not only that, but we'll scrape all the world and pull in all the websites in the world periodically, like every week or so, to keep up with all the changes. And then we'll map all that data to all the companies in the world and show all their, whether or not, you know, they have aliases and they look like they're doing something or not. And also we'll map all the data in your files, the 500 million that they had at the time, plus the stuff from the scraping. Plus we wanted to take all of the international yellow pages and map all that data into one big knowledge file. And then use that to filter and target all of their inspectors at the ports of entry. And we estimated that if we did that to show that we could do that, we scraped one site that showed all of the Iranian companies in Dubai. There were like 5,032 of them, roughly. So, that's my mathematical joke. At any rate, of those 5,032, 222 names mapped to multiple, all collapsed down, multiple names mapping to single attributes. That meant there were 55 different activities that the Iranian government was sponsoring out of Dubai that they needed to investigate. Now, did they do that? No. Did they take our proposal? We proposed to do this for them, fix their database too at the same time, because we've corrected all. In 6 months with 2 programmers and Kirk Wiebe and myself, that was it. We estimated that based on the output from just the Iranian companies that we would get no more than 40,000 targets in the first run of our program for them to monitor and watch. And so they said, well, we've got 2 analysts, so we're not going to do that. And so they didn't. Now this is a simple thing. It's not that hard to even conceive of that, how you can organize the entire import-exports for all the world and figure out what they're doing. Well, in this case, it eventually ended up in this warrant. 2 years later, our government's really fast. You know, they're swift. It only took 2 years to issue this warrant. I mean, this is crazy, right?
Sure.
I think they want to be thorough.
Yeah, well, they wanted to be cautious. But they have never issued a BIS alert on any of the new names we gave them. Now, what they did with that data, I don't know. If they're
Maybe it's
using
still coming up, no?
I'm sure the Iranians are still using it. But this is insane. This is simple. This is not that hard to do. It's what's the question is, what do you want out of the big data? What attributes will help you make that decision, or be able to make decisions on the data you're looking at? And that's what you focus on, and that's how you organize your attack against the big data. The same is true for terrorism in the internet and the public switch telephone networks. No different. It's just there's trillions of transactions there instead of billions.
So maybe you can take up the screen and we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between the uses for big data. I can imagine that there's a lot of great appliances for it, applications for it. So what is the difference between using big data for good and for bad? How do you keep a balance there?
Well, the good and bad is anything you do, there's always that double-edged sword. There's a good part and there's an opportunity to use it badly. I mean, that's what they did the program I left at NSA. So They can do that with anything.
Yeah.
But the point is, the difference is between what they're doing to try to attack that big data now and what they should be doing is the difference between tools that people use to look at data, to make decisions, and processes that process the data and make the decisions for the people. That's the difference. If you use processes, you can manage any amount of data. And our principle was very simple, divide and conquer. If you had too much, split it into the parallel process. That's too much, split it again. Just keep splitting it until you can manage it. That's all. I mean, it wasn't really rocket science. It was just keep everything. I mean, relational databases were out because we couldn't keep up with the flow rate. You couldn't build a relational database fast enough on data coming in because it would pile up. I mean, we tried it. It failed like in the first day. Okay, because we were taking things at optical fiber rate, and you cannot. I mean, it just was impossible to do it. So we just moved everything over to flat files, B+tree indexing type flat files, and it was real quick question answer, and make a decision, and then have parallel processing of it internally to make those parallel decisions. They dribbled over, we added another processor, but it was that kind of processing that just kept going and going, and we had no problem managing any number of fibers. It was only a question how many fibers you want to do, how much space and power do you have, that's all.
So I do want to also go to the questions of the interwebs and of the room. People put in a lot of questions. We're not going to be able to answer all of them, but I'll throw a few at them, and you can see what you think. So this is a Facebook question from Martin van Buren. With Trump being in the office, the internet will be crippled or more because of mass surveillance. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's already crippled by mass surveillance because it's already going on. My hope is that he will stop it. Mm-hmm. That he will recognize the stupidity of our intelligence agencies and the intelligence agencies group in the world because they are consistently failing. And, I'm just a country boy. I came from the country. If you consistently fail, it's pretty obvious you're doing something wrong. That means you have to look at what you're doing, figure out what's wrong, fix it, and so you can start succeeding. Well, they can't even admit they have a problem. So they can't even face it. It's like an alcoholic. If you can't face the fact that you're an alcoholic, you can't fix it. Well, that's what these people are. They're like alcoholics. That's because they're so addicted to the money and the flow and the bureaucracy building and everything. See, they look at my prestige, my ego is dependent on what I manage and how much money I spend, instead of looking at the fact that people get killed because of this. That's what they're not paying attention to. Every once in a while, people have to die to keep this going.
There's a question from Rico in the audience. How do CIA and NSA compare with their influence on global security or lack thereof?
Well, I mean, most of the intelligence community bows down to NSA because they produce like 70% of the PDB President's Daily Brief. And they also produce most of the intelligence in the intelligence data simply because they're collecting everything that everybody's saying. Okay? And if they focus, they have like 6,000 analysts. When I left, they probably have some contractors, a few thousand more looking at it now. So there's more, maybe 8,000 to 10,000 people there looking at it. And if you include GCHQ, the old CSE, and Australia and New Zealand and Germany and a few others in the European Union, there's like my estimate was 20,000 total. So and if they focus on certain things that they know, they can produce so much intelligence, right? But the problem is figuring out what they don't know, and that's in that other massive data. That's where the attacks are coming. And by not focusing on what they don't know, but can associate in his own suspicion, there are queries like X-Keyscore you saw in the original movie. That is like a Google query device that they're using for their analysts. They put words and phrases in there and attributes and things, and then pass it in for a query that goes across the entire set of data collection. And then it just dumps stuff on them. It's like getting back a Google query, or they're going into the graph. Well, the graph is the relationship between everybody on the planet with everybody else on the planet. So if you start somewhere and it looks like there's some interesting path to go, you can go, let me take this next hop and look at that, and oh, there's something interesting there. They can hop and they can hop and they can hop. They can actually go through everybody in the planet, like 4 billion combinations. They could go through every one. I mean, it's not limited. I mean, so the B&D, I think in some of the publications that came out in Stern or Spiegel said that they were doing 8 hops, no more than 8 hops. Well, I mean, 2 hops is the world because everybody uses Google at one time or another. So if you use Google, you're 2 hops from everybody in the world. So that means, you know, you within 2 hops you can get to anybody in the planet. So that's why NSA was really happy with the 2-hop principle. There's no limitation about going through a company or a department of government. And by that meant they could do anybody in the world. They were real happy with that. Well, first clue was when NSA said they were happy, you knew something was wrong. That's the first clue. So, at any rate, yeah.
We have another question from Peter Paul van der Web. How will the quantum computer change the field of mass surveillance? And you earlier talked about quantum storage. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
They've been working on this for about 30-some years. So I wasn't, too impressed by that because really the fundamental problem with processing is in the software, right? The rules you give it to execute. So I looked at it this way. Right now, with mass surveillance, the programs they're using, they get crapped. So when they apply quantum computing, they're going to get crap a hell of a lot faster. So that's my principle of that. Unless they smarten up the software, they're not going to get anywhere. It's real simple.
All right, another Facebook question for you, Katri Oinonen. Do you need security, or do you just trust that nothing bad can happen after exercising your free speech?
Do I personally?
I think the question is, are you scared?
Okay. Is it personally?
Yeah.
Well, personally, I would welcome the opportunity to take these assholes to court. So, I mean, I have all this evidence I would like to present in a court of law. I didn't file an affidavit. I've got 4 separate lawsuits against the NSA that I'm supporting. One in the 2nd Circuit, one in the 3rd Circuit, one in the 11th Circuit, one in the 9th Circuit. And I'm supporting all these, I'm the technical support for these guys, the lawyers doing lawsuits. And so I explain things to them so they know how to phrase it in their statements to the court. So they get, and I even filed an affidavit with the EFF lawsuit, Jewel versus NSA, which is challenging the constitutionality of all this. They all are, really. And I put it all in writing. I put my name down that I'm swearing to, the court that this is true. Nobody's challenged me yet. So that's why I want to get into court. I want to testify to the Congress, and I haven't been able to get there yet either, because these people know me too.
Yeah, I think the answer to "Are you scared?" is
I'm
no. No, not scared at all. All right, Michel Modderkolk.
I'm glad you're pronouncing these names.
Yeah, that's right. If you like Michel Modderkolk. Hey.
Okay.
If the NSA comes to you one day to force you to do something, how should you handle that, and what can you do? How can you prepare for such a scenario?
Well, the first thing I would do is tell them to go to hell. Just get the hell out of my house. That's real simple. They have no jurisdiction there whatsoever. If they came with the FBI or the police, then they'd have some jurisdiction, but then I'd say, where's your warrant? Okay? You have to know the legal. And anytime they want to question me, I'm sorry, where's my lawyer? Because they lie. I found that the affidavit, it took us 5 years to get the sworn affidavit they had to submit to get the warrant to do a raid on us. It took us 5 years to get that out of the court. We had to sue the NSA and CIA and FBI in a court of law to get, we call it 41G return of property lawsuit because they didn't want to give that back either. So we sued them. We won the lawsuit, by the way, because they had no legal grounds at all. So they lost that. But the point was, in there, they lied about us in the affidavit to get the stupid judge who knew nothing. I mean, the judges don't know anything about national security. These people are going to lie to them, and that's basically what Judge Reggie Walton said. He was the senior judge on the FISA court. Right after the Snowden material started coming out, I mean, the first thing was the FISA court ordered to Verizon that was a general warrant, is telling them to give all the data of over 110 million US citizens to NSA, to graph, basically. They didn't know what they were going to do with it, but they signed an order to do that. Now that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. This guy's a judge, and all these people in this FISA court are judges, federal judges. Now these people are violating the Constitution and they know it. So that when they came out, Judge Reggie Walton felt he had to say something to try to justify what they did. And so he came out and said, well, he had limited capacity to even understand or verify what NSA, CIA, or FBI are telling him. In fact, they didn't have limited capacity, he had no capacity at all. I mean, if they came in there and said these people are probably associated with this because we have some indication from their calls that they're involved in this, to compromise the data to the New York Times, which is what they said about us, and they had zero evidence of that. They claimed it, but it was a lie. So, and they put that in the affidavit to get the warrant. But the judge doesn't know, he can't challenge. How can he say, where's your evidence for this, you know? Said, well, we have it. So the judge doesn't look at the raw evidence. All he does is assume that what they're telling him is true. Now, they've known, that FISA court has known since 2002 that they've been lied to by these people because they caught them at it back in 2002. But they haven't wised up yet. These people should be fired. That court belongs in jail, really, for what they've done. And they all should be fired and get rid of it. It should go through a standard court where you produce the evidence, you know.
So this is my personal question, because I'm up here and I can do this sort of stuff. So how do you look at like the newer generation of whistleblowers, someone like Snowden, someone like Chelsea Manning? How do you view the acts of these people who have taken the path that similar to what you have done?
Well, for example, with Edward Snowden, I was in the Oxford debate. The debate with the issue was whether or not he was a hero or a villain, you know. And I was on the side of the hero. So my opening statement was that he basically sacrificed his life so that he could ensure that everybody knew what was actually happening to them. That's what he did. So I basically characterized what he did as a public service for the entire world.
So what I understand is that he took a different path from yours precisely because of what happened to you.
Yes, and also Tom Drake and what happened to him too. Yeah.
So you feel it was the right decision for him to,
Oh, absolutely, yes.
to do that? Yeah, all right. We have another question from Herman. What are you most proud of in your career so far? I assume the whistleblowing part. Maybe he means the NSA stuff.
Technical accomplishments is one thing, you know. Public service is another thing. I consider this public service, and I think that this is the right thing to do. And I'm going to continue to do this as long as I possibly can. And if I can get their face, I'll do that as publicly as I can for as long as I can. So that's my intent. I'm at my mission in life. I mean, I don't have much left, so I'm going to spend it the right way, which is going to expose these criminals for what they did and make sure they, in some way, are accountable for it. That's all. But technically, there was a lot of things that I solved at NSA that were really, that governed basically what most of the NSA did. So for a long time. So those, I was really, because what that meant was our leaders weren't given the wrong information. And if you give leaders the wrong information, like they did with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or like the Tonkin Gulf affair in Vietnam, those were all false, and they made decisions to go to war over that. And you know, 1 million people got killed here, 1 million people got killed there, tens of thousands of U.S. citizens got killed. You know, I mean, this is insane. That you have to ensure you pass the right information to leadership so they don't make blunders that kill people. And I never sent them the wrong information. There were some very sticky points where people were very, very nervous, and I said, "Don't be nervous. This is what they're doing. You're doing this. Continue doing. They watch you do this all the time. Don't worry about it. They're playing too." And because they were at one point, there was at least one. They were very nervous, and so I got a call about that. So, but getting the right information out, nothing happened. Everything just okay. Let's just do our thing. They'll do their thing. We're happy.
So you most definitely saved a couple of lives there.
well, it could have bubbled up to something very serious, yeah.
Are there any regrets you have from your time of working at the NSA? Maybe the fact that you worked at the NSA?
Well, actually not, because I think I did a lot of good in terms of the Cold War, but I don't know how I could have. One of the possibilities, but see, the problem is you have to, when you're in a position of producing intelligence, trying to save lives of people from attacks of terrorists or whatever, you have to figure out ways of solving the problem. And when you figure out ways of solving the problem, it's like creating that sword again. It's always a double-edged thing. They can use it positively or negatively. So, and you try to build things in that which we did, which would conform to the law and human rights, and have a logical, reasonable way of proceeding, keeping into account all the laws and the rights of humans in the world, as well as in the United States. But they could, as Michael Hayden, Tennant, George Bush, and Dick Cheney proved, they can subvert anything you do. So I still thought that was the right thing to do, but we had some very bad people leading our country.
So you were actually a Russia specialist of some kind within the NSA. How do you view America's relationship with Russia right now?
Well, I see this very simply put as internally in the U.S., there's a lot of warmongers, people who want to keep the military-industrial intelligence complex going, and so they need to create enemies, okay? For example, Hillary Clinton tried to say the Russians were in cahoots with Donald Trump so that people wouldn't vote for Trump because he's obviously working for the bad guys, the Russians. So they're trying to characterize the Russians as bad guys. And when they came out and said the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee and also into Hillary's emails and were releasing all this stuff, the WikiLeaks, I said, well, obviously they're trying to, they're playing the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? Look over here. The bad guys are over here, Russia. And they're all with Trump, and he's a bad guy. So that was the game they were playing. And I said, there should be no equivocation here whatsoever. If the Russians are doing, they know it. And they know exactly the trace route of all the packets that were sent to the Russians and the trace route of packets to the WikiLeaks. And they should come out and say, here's the trace routes, there's the IPs and all the stuff and all the addresses and all the computers and servers that went through to get there. And this is the time it took to get there. They know that also because they've got something like 700 trace route programs embedded in the switches just here in Europe alone. If you look at the NSA Space Treasure Map program, one word, treasure map, you'll see all of the stuff. The entire objective there is to map the location of every device on the network every minute of every day. And also trace route all the packets, one of the things they're trying to do to counter the Tor program. So they're trying to trace route the billions of packets that are moving around and where they moved down the segments of the line. If you go and Google that, you'll see that whole program. You'll see it embedded in there. There's about 700 trace route programs in 700 switches in the European area. And so that's how they're trying. So I said, if anything went to Russia and the WikiLeaks, you know where it went, when it went, how long it took to get there. So why don't you lay that out for us? I mean, a couple of years they did that when the Chinese did it. It came from this building in China. Well, what building did it come from in Russia, and where did it go to in WikiLeaks? Come on. If you're going to say that they did it, prove it. I mean, because after all, they have a tradition and a consistency in tradition in lying to everybody. That's why we passed the Trump. I said, if you're talking to the intelligent people and they open their mouth, 90% chance they're lying. Because they'll try to manipulate you any way they can. And oh, by the way, they're listening to all your phone calls, all your email, they're looking at all that too. So they know what you're thinking, so they can be prepared to deal with what you're going to do.
And what is America's relationship with Europe right now? Or with the Netherlands specifically, because most of us are Dutch here and we're getting a little worried.
Well, I mean, there are agreements. The Netherlands is one of the collaborating partners, third-party partners with the U.S. and the Five Eyes group. So the extent of that is written up, and every country has an agreement they do agreements individually, but country by country. But in that agreement, it states the cooperative effort, what would be exchanged, what would be shared. and you know how much of what part of the world people have interest in, so what kind of data they would be collecting and sharing and passing to one another. So they would be using programs like XKeyscore, like the B&D uses, or the GCHQ, or any number of places around the U.S. It has around the world. They use XKeyscore to acquire these programs and the databases in NSA, all those blue squares that were up there on the one slide. They go directly into those databases, and that's what XKeyscore does.
I have another question for you from the audience. Sander van Hoeven. What can I do to protect my privacy better? I heard about creepy multiple personas. What is your advice online?
Well, I can answer for myself, okay? I do absolutely nothing, because I want them to know exactly what I think of them and what I'm saying about them. That's one thing. Plus, if I have two reasons for that. One is, if I encrypt anything and send it to somebody, that person is going to be a target, because I know I am, and if I did that to somebody that would say, hey, I'm planning something with this person, you know. Besides, I would do it under a crypt system that wasn't publicly known, so they wouldn't be able to break it. But that would give them more problems, and they get more concerned. So that person I sent that to would now become a target. I don't do that to people, okay? I wouldn't put people in that position. So I don't encrypt anything, and I do it for another reason also, because if they ever charge me with something and try to say, you know, I used email to send something and this is part of their charge, I would say, well, it's in the public domain, you can't call it classified, so you can't hide it in a court of law. So then they have to come out in the open in a court of law. And that's exactly where I want them.
So is this something you'd recommend for anybody? Or are there some programs or some applications you could recommend for people who like their
Well,
privacy?
see, here's the problem with that. All the encryption systems that are publicly available are subject to the Bull Run program, which is and if you Google Bull Run and NSA, you'll get their program and be able to read about it. It's the cooperative effort on all the companies that design encryption systems have built-in weaknesses, or not all of them, but you don't know which ones, but some of them at least have been building in weaknesses in the crypt system so that NSA can get into them and read them. Or they do things like they let you think you're using your key, but you're really using their key so they can read it, you know. So it's a little bit of software implants would make you think you're using your key, but you're not. So those kinds of things they do. So it's really questionable as to what publicly available crypt system isn't being read. It's hard to say. I don't know. I think most of them are probably being read. It would be easier to design your own crypt system and use it within your community, right? And that would cause them many more problems if everybody came out, because in the analog days, things were much more complex than they are now. And the reason is very simple, because the things being used today around the world are standard. So once you solve the standard, you have the world. But in the analog days, every country was different. Even within the country, there were breakdowns. So there was so many, the complexity was so much greater. And the crypt systems were suite A, not suite B. So you didn't know the algorithms, you didn't know the wiring of the devices, so you didn't know the keys, all those things you had to solve. Whereas, you know, in the case of Turing with the Enigma, he was given the device, the wiring, and the rotors, so he didn't have to calculate the alphabets on the rotor, didn't have the wiring, didn't have to do any of that. So that was over half the problem. So I can't tell you what is secure. I don't know, because of that program, and it's all done in secret, so they'll never tell you, right?
Signal, maybe the Signal app.
I see. Again, I just don't know.
All right. I have another question from the audience, from Lars Delen. Brunel has given a few students the opportunity to join us today. Based on your experiences from 2001 until today, what advice could you give students? So I think, in other words, if there's young people today that have the same technological gifts as maybe you had at the time, how could they best use it for the better of mankind?
Well, I guess, I was asked that question in Germany once too. If there were people who wanted to go into intelligence, what would I recommend to them? I would say, by all means, do infiltrate them. I'm an advocate for infiltration, but in the process, you have to understand you need to maintain your integrity and your character, because that's the first thing they're going to attack. They're going to try to subvert your integrity and character. If you can maintain that there, that means more good goes into the intelligence agency, and ultimately, you know, it will make a difference. So I would say, by all means, do anything you want to in terms of technology. If you see something that looks interesting, you want to get involved, but always remember, you have to try to maintain your character and integrity.
So what is the role of companies in all of this? If you see the pressure that is being put on companies like Google, Facebook by the NSA, if we're dealing with Dutch companies that maybe don't want to collaborate with this sort of mass surveillance programs, what do you recommend we do, both the CEOs of companies, the CTOs of companies, but also the people working there?
I even had advice for U.S. companies, and it goes like this. All of this is unconstitutional in the U.S. and illegal. It's also true in Europe. It's against the privacy laws of individuals in Europe, and the data is really yours. It's not the company's name data. So I recommend that, first of all, when they get requests from NSA, CIA, FBI, or any U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or anything to turn over massive amounts of data or any data on someone, either they produce a warrant with the person's name and the justification, probable cause for that warrant, or you don't give that data to them. And if they say, well, we're going to put you in jail, and then you sue them under constitutional grounds. You take them to court under constitutional grounds, either here in Europe or in the U.S., and people have done that, and they've won. And FBI and the other agencies back away real quick because they don't want it going to the Supreme Court. For example, Nicholas Nair, I think his name is, he had Calyx, was his company name in New York City. He was presented a national security letter by the FBI saying, first of all, you can't talk to anybody about this. You have to give us all your data, period, you know, and about everybody that you're serving and all the data that you have. So he took it to the ACLU and basically said, I'm not going to tolerate this because of free speech violation. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, the Constitution, and everything. So he took it to the ACLU, and they supported him in his lawsuit. And it went into the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and he won that lawsuit. So NSL's national security letters issued by the FBI were declared unconstitutional by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And the FBI backed away real quick, because the Second Circuit is like New York, New Jersey, and just a couple states. So they didn't want to go to the Supreme Court where it would be known across the entire country. So as long as people didn't know that this happened in the Second Circuit, and they were getting NSLs, they would still follow them, see. Whereas I advocated that everybody should sue them. I have 4 lawsuits going, you know, get as many as you can. So in Europe, they're violating your constitutional rights for holding your data. Sue them. Sue the companies, not the government, not the U.S. government. Sue the companies that are doing a part of the prison program. Sue them. I mean, they're violating your rights. Take them to court.
And if you are running a company yourself and you're under pressure, what do you do?
Go to hell. You tell them to go to hell.
Well, that was easy. All right.
Yeah.
So how do you experience awareness in Europe right now? When you talk to Americans and you talk to Europeans, do you find there's a different level of awareness?
Well, actually, there's a large portion of the population that really doesn't still understand what's happening. That's true in the United States as well. They just don't understand the extent of it. I mean, they have some general idea, okay, but not really the extent of it. And for example, when the movie Good American came out in New York, they did a screening there where the Twin Towers were, and a lot of people died. When that movie came out and showed all the corruption behind it and what could have happened but didn't, people were angry, okay? They were angry when they were told the truth about what the intelligence community knew and could have done but didn't. So in other words, knowledge of this is what they've been trying to suppress. They didn't want people. They wanted to keep everybody in the country as uninformed as possible. This is also true with the with the Congress, the U.S. Congress. They tried to keep them uninformed too, so that they could say we have to do this, and then just, you know, they were just like ringing the bell, everybody follows the bell, you know. So that's fundamentally the way they operated, and that's the way they passed this around all the other democracies of the world too. In the UK, they did that. I mean, Duncan Campbell was a reporter, a technical reporter in the UK. He was in Rotterdam with me on a screening for the movie, and at the time, GCHQ and their lawyers were telling the British Parliament that they couldn't distinguish their communications in this bulk acquisition data that's being passed around. So they couldn't say this is yours or this is because they have laws that they're not allowed to collect this data. And he said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Well, that's just horseshit." And he published that. So I said, because very simply put, I mean, we were able to distinguish. That's how we selected data of the whole system of the flow. We were able to do that in the 1990s, and the commercial equipment to do it came out in 2002. So if they want that, they go just buy a Maris device or a Variant device, and that'll handle up to 10 gigabit lines, you know, and all the data on it. Just buy and stack it, and you can filter anything you want in or out of it. So that's been existing and commercially available for, you know, from 2002 up. So this is obviously they're lying to the Parliament. And when I was testifying to the House of Lords, that's what one of the members of the House of Lords said. You mean to tell me that you're here telling us that all the members of the British government and agencies that come forth to testify to us have been lying? I said, yeah, yes, I guess I am. That was it.
So tell us a little bit about the movie you're in that just came out. It's a documentary. It's called The Good American. Is that referring to your duty as a patriot?
I think so. Fritz Moser picked the name. I didn't pick the name. I was just telling my story, my experience at NSA, and I take you through that, and it's in the movie. And there's other people in the movie, other NSA whistleblowers are also in it. But it fundamentally focusing on my experience at NSA and how I was thinking and how the process of thought came to building the graphing and approach to being able to monitor. And I was planning on doing it near real time too, automatically with software, not with people. Fortunately, I didn't do that, so they couldn't execute that. So, but it gives you the idea, the background, and how the entire process of monitoring the mass surveillance is being done. Gives you the idea of how all those blocks and the blue blocks of different software running inside NSA operate and how they interact. So you can get that understanding from that movie. Oliver Stone thought it was the precursor to the Snowden movie. That is, it set up all of the basis for why Snowden made the decision he did. And then the movie Snowden shows you...
Which you're in, as Nicolas Cage.
As Nicolas Cage, yeah. I was also the technical advisor to that movie too. For Oliver Stone, yeah, he had me in there doing that. That's where, if you see any data in there, it was, you can see some of the slides here. Some of those were also in the movie, and other data.
So go see the movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie. It's a great movie, really. It gives you the understanding of what can be happening to you. If you have a computer at home, you know, or one of those little drives that can let you communicate video-wise as well as, you know, by voice, Skype or whatever. You can get the idea of how they can watch you. So you better cover up the screen or something, you know. Otherwise, they can watch you and monitor you.
Do you have any final thoughts for today of how we continue our path in life with this knowledge?
I think this is awareness of the what's really going on and the things you really need to defend yourself against. Now it's a matter of getting together and thinking about how you can really do that. You need to think of two things really as a part of this, and I think Brunel's part of doing this now.
I think Brunel is taking their responsibility,
yes,
and
yes.
I think this is an explicit request for everyone to take our personal responsibility. And how can we do that?
Well, there are two things you have to do. One is, of course, you want to protect the data that you've got, either in storage or transmitting. That should require encryption, and the encryption should be some local design, not publicly known. Then I think you can have some degree of security. And wherever that algorithm to do the encryption or decryption is, you need to put it in a Faraday cage. Like NSA puts their entire building in a Faraday cage. The whole building is actually encased in copper mesh screening. And you can see it running down between the panes of the windows. So it encases the entire building, so radiation can't get out. That doesn't say what happens to people with the inside. You know, when the radiation, there's a lot of radiation, it doesn't go out of the building, it bounces back and forth, you know. It's a long-term experiment that they're having with their people. So eventually we'll know the effect on that. So
maybe the problem, maybe it's solving itself eventually.
You never know. I got out of there after about 5 years of that, so that was good. But you know, but the other thing is to protect your networks. Now, the two things that the governments have a problem with, one is, first of all, they don't really define what they want to protect other than saying everything. You know, but you need to define what you want to protect, and then you have to have a documentation of the network that's around that can access that area of knowledge that you want to protect. If you don't have good documentation, which none of the U.S. government does, they don't, because it works like this. Everything's like an emergency. So I need a line here, I need a line there, I need a line here. So you have all these people who install the lines going around, running around, installing line after line. They don't have time to sit back and document what they just did. And so there's no good documentation. And that's one of the major pitfalls. But if you don't have that, then you have to string your own unique line that then makes it a closed network. That doesn't have to be a major line. Depends on how much you want to protect, how much you would be in terms of communications using.
So back to the two things that we can take home with us today. We have two lessons that we can implement into our lives. One is locally designed.
Design your own encryption. Yeah.
And the other
That's
one?
a lot of fun doing that.
Get working on it, people.
Be creative. You know? I could give you an example of the good. I suggested to Tor, they pass things around in 64-character bits, packets. I said, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you take and reduce it to binary? That would be 512 bits. And then simply do a bit transposition. That destroys the character integrity of the text you're sending. So you do this before the encryption. I don't care what encryption you use. You can use a public one then. But once you do this, this creates 512 factorial variations of bit transpositions. That's like a 1 followed by 1,200 zeros. Okay? So if they're gonna test it using PGP and they're testing a PGP key or something, and they get garbage out, right? And they say, oh, that must not be the right key. Well, unless they test the 1,200 zeros possible bit transpositions for every key assumption they want to try, they're never going to solve it. So, you know, you could do character transposition that destroys the integrity of the words, but if you do bit transposition, it destroys really the integrity of the characters. I prefer that myself. That's more insidious, you know.
Mr. Binney, I think you should have some private classes here with the people who can get into technical detail about that later on and want to know more about how they can fix the world. There's a lot of engineers here today, and I hope they take all of your very wise words to heart. And it's up to the next generation now to secure our world and safety net.
And for the engineers, I had a little thing about engineers.
We actually do have to wrap up, so if you have a couple of last words, that'd be great.
Well, yeah, for engineers, you know, I was always after everything. At least they'll be able to look at it and make a decision whether or not I wanted it. So I said in the environment, from ELF to SHF, you know, I said I just wanted to find anything that was there that there was a signal generated by humans, and I wanted to figure out whether or not, if I looked at it long enough, or I could figure out whether or not I needed it, and I could parallel process all this crap at one time, so I'd take in the entire environment. And they said, well, you know, you can't really do that. There's all the noise floor and all this crap. It looks confusing, you know. I said, well, if you look at any human-generated signal, it shows up as a sine wave property, whereas noise in the noise floor does not. So what I want you to do is do scanning down the entire environment to find sine waves. And when you find a sine wave, I'll put a filter on it, look at it, and see what it is. So this now technique is how they're using for SETI. Okay, they're looking at sections of the universe, looking for sine waves. You know, because you can pick out sine waves. The rest of it's noise. Okay, so So that's the way, so it has many applications, but the idea was the signal generated shows a property if you look at it in the oscilloscope of a sine wave, and you could see that immediately. So it was easy to calculate. I had a lot of other things I wanted to do with that, but you know, that was a lot of fun too. You know, when you have that opportunity, why not have fun? You know?
So don't forget to have fun
Yeah, absolutely.
along the way. All right, thank you so much,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Binney. It's been a great pleasure
Thank you.
having you here and a great honor. Please, a warm round of applause for Mr. Binney.